Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. My friend Rita Jacobs is a passionate professor of English, but she goes way beyond the classroom to preach the importance and joys of the humanities. And she's my guest today. First, let's talk a little bit about you.
Okay.
You're a writer?
I'm
an author.
Right. Well, I'm a writer and an author. I've done a fair amount of journalism as well as written books and written about scholarship and written about things outside of the scholarly domain.
And you're a professor of English?
I am, professor.
So what kind of English do you teach?
Oh, my fields, you know that we always say fields.
Fields.
My fields are contemporary American fiction, American drama, and now, more recently, magazine journalism.
Oh, that's very interesting. And nothing about the computer yet?
About
the internet. Writing for the internet. You think that's going to be different?
When I teach magazine journalism, I actually use the internet, and we take a look at e-zines, things that are published only on the internet, and I encourage my students to submit work there because there are so many of them that it's sometimes easier to get published.
But you do a lot of work in what we call on the general subject of humanism or the humanities.
Well,
what does that mean?
The humanities are traditionally defined. I mean, if you go on the National Endowment for the Humanities website, you'll see that it's English, foreign languages, history, those things we learned in school.
The soft.
Oh, soft.
I mean, it's not science. I'm sorry. I don't mean that.
It's not the sciences,
right.
And it's not the fine arts.
No,
no math, although sometimes social sciences get grouped in with the humanities.
It's interesting. It's not fine arts.
No, because that's the arts. That's why we have a National Endowment for the Humanities.
Very interesting.
Right.
So that's the traditional difference.
It's the traditional difference is that the fine arts, the plastic arts, or the study of the fine arts is its own discipline.
So are people in the art field doing the same thing you're doing by taking their work out into the public? Well, they are to a degree.
Well, they are, because artists are always, and you know what, there are a great many organizations that employ artists to work with different populations.
That's
so
true.
Bringing art out into the community. And that's, the National Endowment for the Humanities began, I can't tell you how many years ago, the state-based programs. For every state has a New York state-based program, a New Jersey state-based program, and we, who run programs for those for those entities, will bring programs to the public or invite the public in, say, to our universities, to, as I did with the sports.
And your university is?
It's Montclair State University, but I am a graduate of Queens College, so my CUNY credentials.
That's very good. So tell me, let's talk about what you're doing. You did sports and the humanities.
Right.
So what exactly did you do?
Well, I decided, Montclair State is the very proud host of the Yogi Berra Museum. And Dave Kaplan, who runs the museum, was a sports editor at the Daily News. And he and I were talking one day, and I said, you know, we should invite people into the museum and run a program called Sports in America, A Humanities Perspective. So I got a little grant, and set up 3 programs. Sports in America, sports journalism. Sports in America, sports in the culture. So we got some film scholars in to talk about baseball movies. And the last one was sports and ethics. And we got some philosophers in to talk about ethical implications, which is very hot right now. Right.
The whole thing, I mean, the whole study of humanities, I think, doesn't it interconnect all over with ethics?
Well,
it's such a hard thing to grasp.
Are you talking about ethics or are you talking about morals?
Oh, that's a distinction?
Yeah, ethics is actually a philosophical area. Philosophers specialize in ethics. They're ethicists.
Right.
And we have medical ethicists, etc. But the notion of moral behavior or the ways in which people, quote, should behave as opposed to the way they do is definitely something that comes into certainly psychology, which is considered one of the humanities, social science version of the humanities.
So with the sports people, who came to these seminars?
We opened it to the public. I had several retired sports fanatics who had the time to come during the day. And we had high school students from all over New Jersey, and we had teachers, we had coaches. A lot of coaches came to see what was going on, what they could bring back. And I had a couple of people who were Yogi Berra fans. And in fact, I got Yogi to speak on one of the panels.
So what exactly did they say?
Well, they basically talked about the way they plied their trade, which was either the writing trade or the film analysis trade, vis-a-vis these artifacts that had to do with sports. So Jerry Eisenberg came and talked about covering Yogi, while Yogi was sitting there saying what it felt like to be covered.
What does that mean, covered?
He wrote about him. Went on the train, followed the Yankees at that point.
So he related his experience of being a writer.
Related the experience of being a writer to writing about sports.
And then do you write about the impact of that?
That's sort of the important thing, is figuring out for this Sports in America, what the impact of sports is on the culture in general.
Right.
So that's the humanities, analyzing an event, something that happens, the way it impacts our culture.
So what was the result about the sports? Everything.
There are never results, Ronnie, when you're an academic visiting something.
I know. I've always had this great difficulty with the academic world because it's so different. You know, I'm pragmatic. I want to see a result.
Well, you do see results, but the results often have a longer unfolding. You know, you get responses from people. You give them forms to fill out and say, what did you think of the program? How might you make use of some of the information you learned? For example, if I can jump ahead to another humanities outside, as you know, I taught a course at a hospital this year in literature and medicine for doctors.
Right.
So I had doctors, nurses, lab techs. They were all reading Angels in America. And I know you just had Tony Kushner on for conversation. And I can't tell you what the result is going to be now.
But what you're basically saying is the value of the written word. The written word is a very valuable thing in our development and in our conduct and in our lives.
Not only a very important thing, it's a very powerful thing. Very, very powerful. If you remember reading when you were 10 or 11, those books changed your life. They determined who you were going to be and how you were going to be. And as we read, as we grow older, I had a professor in college who said, the reason you read literature is because it teaches you how to fail. And I thought, who wants to know how to fail? But experiencing life and some of the difficulties of life in reading enables you to better handle your own life.
So it expands your world. It expands your acquaintances. It's as if you've met these people or as if you had an other life experience, is what you're saying.
Absolutely. When I talk to people about journal writing, which is another area of mine,
we'll get to that.
I say it allows you to live your life twice. Once when you're living it and once when you're writing about it. So reading novels allows you to live many lives. And then if you can take that and move it into the sphere of your own life, how you interact with other people, how you read a novel about an 87-year-old person, let me tell you, you look at older people in your life differently.
Well, I remember reading Gone with the Wind when I was quite young, and I certainly had a different perspective of the South then than I have now.
I'm not sure it was a positive perception. Or did you fall in love with Rhett Butler like we all did?
No, I didn't fall in love with him. I loved the clothes. And I still think about the draperies being made into that great velvet dress. And I still think about that a lot.
Do you know Anna Quinlan?
Because I want to make things,
Anna Quinlan wrote the best column once about the boyfriend versus the husband.
Yeah.
And Rhett Butler's a boyfriend. And Ashley Wilkes is a husband. And you have to make a decision who you're going to marry.
Well, I have to tell you that Ashley Wilkes in my later years is a very weak man.
Yes, and he was a weak man
and
then
I didn't like him, but then he was much more attractive. This all started, didn't it, many years ago?
Many.
You wrote a report for the Rockefeller Foundation.
Right, I wrote on
the Useful Humanists.
I called
did
it the
that happen?
Useful Humanist. Well,
Yeah.
you know what happened? When I got out of graduate school in the mid-'70s, there was a big crisis in finding jobs for people with PhDs. And as somebody with a PhD in English, I didn't quite know what I was going to do. And I was working with the American Studies Association, and I said, well, I might as well help myself as well. So I wrote a grant to investigate roles for humanists in corporations, actually. I was thinking that corporate social responsibility was a good place for humanists to work.
That was the beginning then, wasn't it?
Very beginning of all of that. And there was a brilliant man who was the head of the Rockefeller Foundation named John Knowles, who died much too young, who was really interested in this. A physician who had been president of Mass General, came to Rockefeller, and he said, I love it. And it was just the beginning of, you know, classes in philosophy in medical schools, etc. So I went and interviewed, 75 CEOs of major corporations, and found that most of them had liberal arts or humanities backgrounds.
That's very interesting.
And
so that reinforced the whole feeling of how important this all was.
But they weren't hiring humanists. They were hiring engineers and business majors, etc. So it's just started sort of infiltrating that if you hire an English major or a history major, you can teach that person to do most of what you want them to do. But they come in with the ability to deal with ambiguity, to research, to come out with a very clear point of view using a variety of different resources, both themselves as human beings and historical resources, and opinion. Much better trained to deal with the vagaries of human decision-making.
So interesting. It really is. Then you also, as you said before, start this.
Right.
Which is journal writing.
Yeah, that's
this
kind of...
wonderful box.
It's a
always
great
loved
box,
it. And then
isn't
it's
it?
got these 2 volumes, right?
It's got a book and a blank journal.
Right.
It was designed by a wonderful book designer.
It's called The Way In, Journal Writing for Self-Discovery. That's part of it.
Well,
it's an extension.
It's an extension, but it's also very personal. I'm the child of a Holocaust surviving family. My mother escaped, but my grandparents were killed, and my aunts were in Auschwitz. When I was a little girl, I was told never to tell anybody anything. Don't tell anybody. And I said, well, I had so much to say. And I started keeping a diary when I was about 10. And it was a little girl's diary at that point. But it became a journal, which I consider a more grown-up diary. And I realized how important it was for me to reflect on my life and to reflect on what I was reading and what I was learning and the people around me. So I took everything I knew and wrote this book, which I then, and this is part of what we were talking about, I then went to the Ukraine, just as it, or Ukraine, I can't say the Ukraine, when it became a democracy, and let some college students read excerpts from Anne Frank, from the Diary of Anne Frank, and convinced them that if they wrote about what they were going through and what the country was going through at that point, it would be very valuable for them when they became grown-up citizens in a democracy. And I worked with them for about a month. And the Orange Revolution, which took place probably 8 months later, I got emails from everybody saying, we're prepared. Part of it was keeping these journals and knowing what we wanted.
That's interesting.
I mean, it was one small group of students, and they certainly didn't make the Orange Revolution, but they felt free to participate.
Do you still do it?
Do I still keep a journal?
When do you have time to do this journal writing? That's the
I do
major
it less
problem.
regularly than I used to, but I teach a course in journal writing workshop at Rancho La Puerta and at the Golden Door.
That's all very good.
I get nice spa weeks for teaching
well, let's
journal
not talk
writing.
about how smart you are that way.
No, but I also do it for groups.
Yeah.
I will do it for groups of people who are either in crisis, or I'm asked to do it for various groups.
Have you ever done it in prisons?
You know, I haven't, and I should. I've done it for people who have developmentally disabled children, or people who want to recoup memories. I've done it for Hadassah in terms of writing Jewish memory, recalling early memories. But yeah, prisons would be great.
So have you studied psychology?
No, I've read novels,
So do you?
which is the same thing.
But do they encourage this when you study psychology? If you got a doctorate in psychology, are they well read? Does anybody who has a doctorate a humanist?
No. No. I mean, if you have a doctorate in the humanities, humanist is a funny word. Humanist has also some sort of cultural meanings about people who have moral standards. So being a humanist outside of the academy means you care about all people. But being a humanist inside the academy means you've studied one of these fields. Do psychologists read novels and make psychological diagnoses about characters? If they read novels, they do.
It's interesting.
But they're not trained to do that.
Right. I remember when I worked at Ms. Magazine,
Oh, yes.
and people would say, are you a feminist?
Ah,
And very often there was no reason. Of course I'm a feminist. But we tried to expand it by saying, I'm a humanist.
interesting.
And using that expression to embrace the question of equality.
Huh.
That we believe in the welfare of everybody,
Right,
not just
right.
in women, and equality, period. And so we used it almost politically. And actually, I've used it politically quite a lot.
And for good reason. And
Right.
it should be used more often that way, I think.
It is a very interesting distinction. I mean, it's a finer refinement. It's not a distinction, right?
Yeah, there is, I think the man's name was Corliss Lamont or
Yes,
something,
right.
who a long time ago talked about humanism and being a
Yes.
humanist.
Right.
And that's a worldly definition.
But that was considered a dream or something. I think the objective, although I don't know if you have objectives in academia.
we have
You have curriculums and tests.
we have curriculums and tests and goals and measurements and everything.
So we also discussed earlier the difference between morality. Can we say
moral.
morality?
You can say morality.
And ethical behavior?
Right.
What's that difference?
I'm not a philosopher, and I can't give you that philosophy. But I think you'll find that psychologists have a scale of morality, the way people behave. Ethicists determine
More rules.
rubrics for ethical behavior.
Right.
The New York Times has an ethicist, who writes a
Yes,
column, which makes
Randy-
no sense to
Randy
me.
Cohn, right?
It just, and if you go to a priest or a rabbi or a minister, you're talking about morality and ethics. But how do you develop your own
Well,
code?
the Ten Commandments.
Yeah. The Ten Commandments, or
Is
you've
that
learned
injecting the humanities into our life?
the Ten Commandments.
It must be.
The Ten Commandments are sort of the bedrock of Judeo-Christian
Right.
behavior, so it does.
Right.
But if you read Angels in America,
Uh-huh.
and you find that one character cannot stand his partner's illness and goes to the rabbi in the play and says, what do you call somebody who cannot stay with someone in a period of crisis? What's the punishment? And the rabbi says, who would do such a thing? Now you, the viewer, the reader, the audience, makes a judgment. And that judgment is based on what? Your own set of ethics, your own set of morals, your own adherence to the commandments or religion. That's not something people teach
Right.
in schools.
Right.
I mean, they teach the precepts of behavior and maybe ethical or good behavior as opposed to evil behavior. But how a student takes that. The thing in a humanities class is you get a chance to talk about that. Why did you make that decision? How did you feel? Were you understanding of this man's need to leave? The subtleties, the ambiguities, that's what's important to deal with.
So where does the writer, the author of this, get his or her ideas? From other books?
Oh, Where do writers
parents.
get their ideas?
Where do we get all this?
Boy,
Where
I
does it
wish
start?
Where do we? Well, you know, if
Family.
family is definitely the root of it. But I think, personally, I think education is incredibly important. I think those teachers I had as a child coming from a non-English writing family. My mother does not read and write English, although she has great folk tales and Hungarian stories. But I learned from my grammar school teachers and from my junior high school teachers how to read, how to discuss what I read, how to relate what I read to my own life, and they became incredibly important for me, which is probably, you just made me realize why I do what I do,
Right.
to bring that out.
Now, are you an activist? Well, you are an activist humanist.
I am. I am. I have a new
So you just
title.
got your-
I'm an activist humanist.
But what do you do about education? I mean, let's talk about some of the global political issues or sociological issues. Education. I was on a panel
yeah.
that we talked about race, we talked about poverty, class, but we said that the basic thing in it was education.
It is.
So how do we affect public policy with humanism?
Well, you affect public policy in one part by educating students to be vocal about what they believe and what they think. It starts in the classroom. I have many discussions in my classroom about race because characters in novels or in plays have issues.
What plays do you refer to? Or what books, novels?
Well, we read, in the drama course, we read Fences. So August Wilson is a perfect way to get into that. And I read Fences and Death of a Salesman, and we talk about family and how there's very little difference in families. And if you think about those two plays, both men are committed to their families but have affairs. Both women are long-suffering. Both men are struggling to make it economically. It's very interesting.
Yeah.
In my contemporary fiction course, well, I teach Native Son in the 1945 fiction, up to 1945, and then I teach a wonderful book by Charles Johnson called Middle Passage, which is much more contemporary. I think it's 1990. But talking about race, talking about how the world should look, how the world does look, how the world looks in a novel, and how the world should look. Emerson, in the middle of the 19th century, talked about how people can learn about the world from reading and therefore be able to be activated to reform their world. So that's what happens in the classroom. I don't always take it to, I do take it to register to vote. I don't take it to who you should vote for because that's illegal.
Do you find your students are easier about race these days?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. I had an experience this semester which was troubling to me. We were talking about race in the classroom regarding a book, and I started talking about race on campus and whether or not the cafeteria, which seemed very desegregated to me, Hispanic kids at one table, black kids at another table, white kids at another table.
Segregated, not
segregated, not integrated.
Right.
I want to seem very, deintegrated. And one student said to me, I don't think talking about this helps at all. And I said, really, why not? She said, no matter what we do, there will still be scholarships that I want to apply for that give minorities preference. And I said, we should talk about that.
Yeah.
Because
So
that's
a very
also
interesting
part of very interesting.
Yeah. Well, so will you follow that up? Is that still a class or not?
No, it's.
All right.
We did follow it up. And we actually followed it up, and I got her the information that said preference wasn't given. She had read this and thought.
Yeah, that was it. You have a title, Jerry Springer is alive and well in Central Europe. What does that mean?
Oh my goodness, you're right. I gave a lecture in Budapest about television programming in Eastern Europe, in Central Eastern Europe, and their model for these programs are screaming and yelling Jerry Springer. It was remarkable. I had never seen anything like that.
You know, there's a television program on now, a Japanese stunt show or something. I mean, I've only seen it for a minute. It is the craziest thing in the world. And they're yelling and screaming and people are falling into water, but it is an authentic show done in Japan.
Wasn't this in Lost in Translation, that movie? Didn't they have...
I don't know. I didn't see that.
The Bill Murray character goes on a show like that where they're yelling and screaming and the man was...
So did they did they enjoy your lecture? Who knows?
I don't know.
You haven't heard that they've got more Masterpiece Theater.
They have not got more
Europe.
Masterpiece Theater, no.
Well, we've come to the end of this half hour, which is really quite amazing.
That's amazing.
But I think you have given us a lot to think about. And I think I'll go home and try to do a journal. I have all these notebooks at home that I start at the beginning and then I write at the end, you know, and I hate to, I want them to be beautiful. And every once in a while in the middle of something, there's a recitation of a particularly traumatic experience or stress. And I'll read this one page and then I go on to something else.
Here's my advice. Most people write in their journals when they're unhappy. Write when you're happy also.
That's very good, and that's a lovely way to end the program. Thank you, Rita Jacobs.
You're very welcome, Ronnie.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.